The Arizona Cardinals last year, they won 11 games and they made it to the playoffs for the first time since 2015. However, I gotta say, I am not that high on them heading into this year, and I'm gonna go over that in today's video. Before we get started though, hit that like button if you enjoyed, since it really helps out the channel. And of course, subscribe if you guys are new and you guys enjoy this type of content, so you don't miss out on any new videos like this. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get this video started. Now let's start things off by talking about their offense. Kyler Murray is obviously their quarterback, and opinions on him, they vary from person to person. Some people like him, while other people don't like him. Now, I don't really have super strong feelings about Kyler Murray, but Kyler Murray is definitely a very good quarterback. I'd definitely say he is in that top 11 to 15 range, and definitely very good. That being said, he definitely has some flaws, but every quarterback does have their flaws. And as I said before, Kyler Murray is a super good quarterback, and he still has room to improve, and I could see him taking that leap into being a top 7 to 10 quarterback, because he is super talented and he's still a pretty young player. So again, he can get better, and that's really all I gotta say for Kyler Murray. Again, a very good quarterback, and he can definitely improve. Now after him, I do want to talk about running back, and running back is not that bad for the Cardinals. Now, I do think James Conner is slightly overrated, mostly because, he can struggle with his consistency when it comes to his efficiency as a runner. But aside from that, James Conner, he is a pretty good player, not that bad of a rusher, super good as like a goal line threat and, just getting it into the end zone. And he is also a pretty capable receiving back as well. But, James Conner, a pretty solid running back, in my opinion. My only concern about Arizona's running back room is really just who their RB2 is going to be. But aside from that, I do like running back for them. Then we do have wide receiver, and wide receiver has to be one of the Cardinals' biggest strong suits. I mean, you got DeAndre Hopkins, who's one of the best receivers in the NFL. I don't care what anyone says, and he is going to miss the first 6 weeks of the season due to a suspension. But that being said, when he's on the field, he's one of the best receivers in the entire league. And they also traded for Marquise Brown. And Marquise Brown, he's a super good wide receiver as well. And he's coming off a career season. And he is former college teammates with Kyler Murray. And, maybe that chemistry does translate onto the field. And I think Marquise Brown is going to have a super big year with at least 1,000 receiving yards and like 5 touchdowns. And Marquise Brown, in my opinion, I think his best role is really a number 2, and I think as a number 2 wide receiver, he can be elite, like just a really elite number 2 wide receiver. And once D-Hop does come back, I think him and D-Hop, they're going to form one of the best receiver duos in the NFL. But it's not just those two. You got Rondale Moore, and I do like Rondale Moore a lot. I think he can be a pretty good, slot receiver, gadget player for them. I don't think he's going to go for like 1,300 and like 12 touchdowns, but I think he's going to have a pretty good season. And they also do have AJ Green, and AJ Green, obviously, he's out of his prime, but AJ Green is still a pretty decent player, and he actually had like 800 yards, I believe, for Arizona last year, so he can be a pretty good depth piece for them. And to wrap up the skill position group, we obviously got to talk about tight end. And the Cardinals do have a pretty good tight end duo with Zach Ertz and Trey McBride. Zach Ertz, he is getting a little bit old, and he's not the same player he once was, but this man can still ball, and he was super good for the Cardinals last year, in the games in which he played for them. And then you got Trey McBride, and Trey McBride, in my opinion, was the best tight end in the draft. And while I was kind of skeptical about the pick, it doesn't take away from the fact that he is a really good player. And who knows how productive he is in his first year behind Zach Ertz. But once he does take over that tight end room, I think he's going to be a beast in the NFL. Now let's talk about the Cardinals defense, and this is where my concerns lie. Let's start things off by talking about their front seven. Now, J.J. Watt is still a really good player. He's not, prime J.J. Watt, obviously, but he can still play. But my issue with him is that, he's kind of old, and then B, this is the main thing, he's made out of glass, and I really hate to say it, but you just can't count on him to play a full season. So, J.J. Watt is, again, he's a good player, but I'm just not confident in him playing a full season. So, him missing some games, that's obviously going to be super detrimental. And I think him missing games is, or missing the second half of last year was a big reason why they collapsed in the second half of last year. And then when you look at their edge rushers, Marcus Golden was super good last year. However, I'm not sure how he's good, how he is as a number one edge rusher. I mean, he's been kind of inconsistent throughout his career, and Arizona, they lost Chandler Jones, and while Chandler Jones was having a down season in 2021, and while I do understand why Arizona maybe chose not to pay him, it's undeniable that losing him was a big blow to their team. And I do think that, losing him again, it's going to be a pretty big loss, and it will affect that defense. And I do think it will affect Marcus Golden. I'm just not confident in him being a number one edge rusher. You got Dennis Gardner, and Dennis Gardner is honestly just, he's just kind of meh, honestly. He's just not anything to go, really ride home about. He's really just okay. Now, they did draft Myjai Sanders and Cameron Thomas. Myjai Sanders, in my opinion, he's raw and pretty developmental, so I don't think his impact in his first year is really going to be massive. And Cameron Thomas, I thought, was actually, solid out of San Diego State, but again, he is a rookie, and he is a third-round rookie, so it's really just, it's really hard to really expect him to be a god in his first season. So this Cardinals pass rush, I gotta say, I'm kind of concerned about it, really. I don't think it's going to be phenomenal in this upcoming season. Then you got the linebackers. Now, the linebackers, they're actually promising because they do have two, pretty young players, and obviously Isaiah Simmons and Zaven Collins. Now, if you watched my video on every single team's breakout player for 2022, you would know that I predicted Isaiah Simmons to break out. And I think there is a good chance it does happen, because Isaiah Simmons, the guy was highly touted out of Clemson for a reason. And I do think that, there's a high chance that soon enough, he does finally put it all together and has a really good year. But that being said, up to, so far, he really hasn't been amazing. And there is always that chance that he's not that good in 2022. And then you have Zaven Collins. And Zaven Collins I liked out of Tulsa, but when the Cardinals selected him in the first round in 2021, I was kind of puzzled because I didn't really think they needed a linebacker. But Zaven Collins' first year was just forgettable, to say the least. Now, I think he'll obviously get way more opportunity in his second year, but Zaven Collins, he's just kind of a big question mark right now. And again, it's kind of the same case with Isaiah Simmons. There's a world where he's really good, but there's also a world where he's not really amazing. But, linebacker, I think it's okay. And then to wrap the defense up, let's talk about that secondary. Now, the secondary, I think it's a little bit better. You got a really good safety duo with Budda Baker and Jalen Thompson. Budda Baker being one of the best safeties in the NFL, and Jalen Thompson, he's pretty solid in his own right. But the cornerbacks are really nothing. They really are not that good. Byron Murphy, I do like a lot. I think he's a very good slot corner. And they did today actually trade for Trayvon Mullen. And Trayvon Mullen, I think he's solid. So he improves their cornerback room, but by how much, I'm not totally sure. So, I mean, this defense, I really just don't love it all that much. Again, pass rush, I don't think it's really amazing. Linebackers are promising, but there is a world where they just aren't good. Safety, you're pretty good at, so nothing to really worry about there. But cornerback, it's just okay and nothing to really ride home about. Now, I do want to talk about, the coaching and the schedule. Now, the coaching, let's talk about Cliff Kingsbury. Cliff Kingsbury, I won't lie, I do think he sometimes gets a little bit overhated because for as much, flack as he gets, you gotta give him credit where it's due, because the Cardinals under him have, they've actually become relevant, and they have improved under him every single season. I mean, they went from 5 wins in 2019 to 8 in 2020 and 11 in 2021. So obviously he deserves credit there. But that being said, he definitely deserves a lot of blame when it comes to Arizona falling apart in the second half, of seasons, because that has been a pattern, starting from 2020, and he's a big reason why that does happen. I mean, sometimes his play calling just really isn't good, and he doesn't adjust, and, his team's falling apart in the second half of years. I mean, that dates back all the way to college, so, Cliff Kingsbury, he has to change his ways if he does want to be obviously more loved around the NFL, and if the Cardinals do want to contend for a Super Bowl. But I'm not sure if he will change his ways. But Cliff Kingsbury, my thoughts on him as a coach is that he's just kind of he's okay. I mean, he does have some positives, but at the same time he has some pretty glaring negatives. So Cliff Kingsbury, again, I just think he's okay, really not an amazing coach. Now I do want to talk about the Cardinals' schedule. Obviously, they play the NFC West for 6 of their games, and I think best case scenario is that they win 3 to 4 of them. And then they play the NFC South. In the NFC South, I'd say best case scenario is 3-1. Worst case scenario, I'd go with 1-3. And then they play the AFC West, and obviously that's not going to be easy at all. Best case scenario, in my opinion, is 2-2, while their worst case is 1-3. And then following those, the last 3 games come against the Patriots, the Eagles, and the Vikings. Best case scenario, in my opinion, against them is 2-1. Worst case scenario, I'd say, is 1-2. And I'd say overall, my worst case scenario for Arizona is 6-11. However, that being said, best case could be 11-6 or 12-5. But, aside from that, I will give a few tips on how Arizona could prove me wrong. One, Kyler Murray, if he is consistent throughout the year, consistency has obviously been a massive issue for him, but if he remains consistent, maybe Arizona does prove me wrong. Also, Cliff Kingsbury also does prove me and many others wrong by not folding in the second half of the year. And, I think Isaiah Simmons and Zaven Collins do have to have good seasons in order for that defense to remain at least passable. And, speaking of the defense, I'd say the defense overall has to surprise me. Like, maybe the pass rush is still fine, and, as I mentioned before, the linebackers play well, and heck, maybe even the secondary really isn't, it's better than what we think. But, those are some tips on how I think they could prove me wrong. But, again, as I said before, I'm not that high on Arizona. But pretty much all I gotta say for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. It really means a lot to me. Again, like, subscribe, do all of that stuff. And, of course, check me out on social media. Links to my Twitter and Instagram, they are in the description below. But without further ado, I'm out, you guys.